What do you picture when you think about Hollywood? Ironically, many try to glamorize it to the point of thinking that if you can make it there, your life is set. As we've learned over the decades, that isn't even close to being true. In fact, if you make it in Hollywood and make it through mostly unscathed, you're basically one of the lucky ones of the world. Even during the legendary golden age of Hollywood, there were all kinds of things going on behind the scenes that are shocking to think about at times, and yet they happened. Or just as bad, they were never confirmed. But those in the know were all too happy to spread rumors about stars, directors, and so on, so that these things could never be forgotten. Allow us to share some of these with you. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. 6. The casting couch. We're going to start off this list a bit different, as we're not going to focus on one specific actor, director, etc., but instead focus on a literal, age-old tradition that started in the Golden Age and went right up to the modern era before finally it stopped. Or at least we do hope that it's fully over with. We're speaking of the infamous practice known as the casting couch. If you've ever heard the insult, they slept their way to the top, that's not a phrase that was born solely out of malice, but out of precedent. You see, back in the days of old Hollywood, women were valued on the big screen and the TV screen, but only up to a point. Women had some power in Hollywood, but not as much to be considered on equal grounds. Do recall that during key decades of the last 100 years, women had to fight for every right that they should have naturally had. As such, pretty every big-name director, studio head, casting director, etc. was male, and they would flex their influence on certain female stars to ensure that they had their way with them if they wanted the role. Thus was born the casting couch. It was a vile practice, and one that continued on because Hollywood as a whole wasn't going to rat on itself, and those who had been affected by it were too scared to come clean due to a culture that was very much of the protect the shield variety. Eventually, things came to a head via the Me Too movement, and many were called out, blacklisted, or straight up put in jail for their crimes. It's not a perfect system in Hollywood, though, as many will happily tell you, but the truth about what happened before is out there, and that's a big step forward. In many ways, the rumors for this first entry are about the women who were forced to participate in this practice, as we'll never truly know the full number, and that should horrify you. 5. The death of Thomas Ince. Death in Hollywood is an inevitability, not because it's the most dangerous place to work, though there have been deaths on various sets over the years, but because people die. And when a big-name star in front or behind the camera dies, it gets attention. In the case of Thomas Ince, though, his death was more curious than anything else. For those unaware of this man's contributions to Hollywood, he was a pioneer in creating movie studios that had all the technology that is pretty much standard right now. Due to this, he was able to craft a legacy that made him very successful. In fact, he was the man behind MGM Studios and Paramount Pictures. So yeah, the dude had talent, and then he sold them and became very rich. Go figure. Except then, things went bad for him, and to distract himself from his money issues, he threw himself a big birthday party. Can you guess what's about to happen? His friends held the party on a yacht, and apparently Ince had stomach problems and needed to be seen by a doctor. Fairly standard stuff, right? Except after being discharged by the doctor, he died the next day. The official report claimed it was of heart failure, but there's a couple problems with that, not the least of which was that he was only 42 years old. As such, rumors swirled that he actually died of being shot. Just as crazy was that one of the prevailing killers in these rumors was Charlie Chaplin, or someone tried to kill Chaplin and killed Ince instead. If you're thinking, why didn't they examine the body was quickly cremated after the events, and an alleged witness was paid off with a movie contract. Thus, the mystery continues. The abuse of Judy Garland. Judy Garland is one of those timeless talents that you can't help but both marvel and feel sad when you talk about her. Because in many ways, her story is one of both the incredible wonder of Hollywood mixed with the darkness that lies within it to those who aren't prepared to handle its many forms. Obviously, she is most famous for being Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, but she was much more than a single role. She made the original A Star is Born, Meet Me in St. Louis, and more. Garland was one of the leading ladies in Hollywood for a time, which makes the rumors and tales of her abuse behind the scenes all the more terrible. One of the biggest things that happened to her was that the studio who hired her and produced many of her hit movies were obsessed with her figure. No, not in the dirty sense, though that has happened before, as we noted. Instead, we're talking about how the studio intentionally tried to keep Judy Garland at a certain size weight-wise, as they felt she was fat when she was left to her own devices. The abuse she took in this was so heinous that it led to her death. She was even pronounced semi-invalid at one point. It also led to serious physical and mental issues, including a lifelong battle with depression, a dependence on drugs, and not making the best of choices, including getting married multiple times and letting the wrong people control her finances. It was due to all of this that she died young and pretty much penniless. Even still, Judy Garland worked hard to the end of her life. Not because she wanted to get back her fame and fortune, but because she had children and wanted nothing more than to take care of them as best she could. Hollywood betrayed Judy Garland, and that's something that should never be forgiven. 3. Natalie Wood's mother. This next one is arguably one we can all believe, because all likely know someone who has gone through this with their own parent. Natalie Wood was another big Hollywood star, who had looks to put anyone in awe, and her talent was apparent on screen too. Her problem, though, wasn't the studio taking advantage of her, but the fact her mother was basically a tyrant. We all know the type, right? The ones who push their children to their limits to make sure they became what they're meant to be. To a certain level, that's the job of all parents. The problem with Natalie Wood's mom, Maria, was that she pushed her child beyond her limits and did unspeakable things to her in the name of advancing her daughter's career. Like many mothers of this type, it was likely derived from the fact that she, Maria, hadn't done much in her life, and so she tried to live vicariously through her daughter and make all her decisions for her. While you could argue that managing Natalie's finances as a young child star is one thing, that leeway gets lost when Woods turned into an adult, and any notion of her just caring for her daughter is absolutely lost when you hear that there were plenty of rumors of Maria putting her own daughter on the casting couch. As such, when Woods was finally able to break free from her mother, it didn't just damage the two's relationship, but it made Natalie apparently very self-conscious about trusting others. Can you really blame her, given all she likely went through? 2. Jeannette MacDonald's terrible treatment. As we established in our first entry, in the golden age of Hollywood, there were certain people in charge who had such power that they didn't just control the fate of movies, but the fate of their actors. Enter Louis B. Mayer, who was the head of MGM at the time, and was known for ruling with an iron fist. He wanted to make as much money as possible from the actors he had, and two of his biggest stars were Jeannette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy. When they were on screen together, they had a chemistry that no one could deny. So Mayer made it so that the two were almost always together in a production, doing 11 musicals together. However, he also structured their contracts so that they wouldn't be able to do more personal stuff on their own or with each other. Why? Because he wanted them to maintain their movie personas for as long as possible. This was how much he saw monetary value in them. A twist of fate occurred, though, when these two actually did fall in love and started to spend a lot of time together as a result. While they were never married, Jeannette did get pregnant with Eddy's child. That sent Mayer through the rough, because not only did he now have a pregnant starlet, which would restrict her filming ability, but these two had the child out of wedlock, which he felt would ruin their public image. So what did he do? He basically forced her to have an abortion, or else she'd never be in a movie again. The twists kept coming, though, as she had a miscarriage instead, and when Eddy found out she lost the baby, not being told it was from a miscarriage, but instead being told it was from an abortion, he broke off their relationship. Mayer seized on this opportunity and got Jeannette into more contracts so that she would do even more work for him. She had basically no choice but to sign them because she had lost everything else of importance. 1. William Taylor. Assassinated? Finally, we end things with another death that had plenty of mystery and intrigue surrounding it. William Taylor was a famous director in Los Angeles. When the morning after saying goodnight to his partner at the time, he was found dead in his home with a single bullet to the back being the cause of his death. Naturally, many started to wonder what happened, but the events of the death painted many pictures, each wilder than the next. One would immediately assume that it was his partner, who happened to be a big starlet himself, as the main suspect. But there was also another starlet who had become obsessed with him. Then there was a servant at his home who had been caught stealing with him. And then on top of all of that, the golden age of Hollywood was rife with mob connections, and Taylor was one of the only people brave enough to stand up to them. He even let the FBI know about their actions near movie studios, and that might have been enough for the mob to send a hitman out to kill Taylor. Which of these was really the cause of his death? Well, what's a good movie plot without a cliffhanger to ponder? Absolutely. Here's a 4,000 character insert you can place right after, without a cliffhanger to ponder, and right before. And that's all from the period of Hollywood. Insert below. It's moments like these, unsolved, unnerving, and unexplained, that keep old Hollywood myths alive. The Golden Age might seem glittering on the surface, but behind the limelight, the industry was a tangled web of power, paranoia, and cover-ups. The studio system didn't just manufacture stars, it manufactured narratives, controlling not only what the public saw, but also what they were never meant to know. That's what makes stories like William Taylor's and others like it so enduring. They exist in a liminal space between truth and lore. And for every tale that survived, there are dozens more that were likely buried by design. Whether it was destroyed documentation, silenced witnesses, or contracts with ironclad non-disclosure clauses, old Hollywood knew how to erase inconvenient truths. These weren't just slip-ups in public relations, they were full-on campaigns to ensure that whatever damage was done behind the scenes never reached the front page. Today we often talk about cancel culture, but in those days, stars were discarded without explanation, or worse, rewritten entirely. Their legacies crafted posthumously to match what the studios needed them to be. Even worse was the level of complicity that flowed from the top down. Agents, producers, directors, publicists, they all knew what was happening. Some actively orchestrated these scandals, others simply stood by. In either case, silence equaled survival. That's why so many of these stories didn't come to light until decades later, when the control mechanism started to decay and new generations began asking the hard questions. And let's not ignore the role of the tabloids and their influence. While many legitimate news outlets turned a blind eye to what was happening behind the velvet ropes, the gossip rags pounced. Sometimes they told the truth. Other times they embellished the most salacious aspects to sell papers. But in their own twisted way, they preserved what the studios tried to suppress. Those whispered stories passed from studio lot to printing press to dinner table, eventually planting the seeds of public suspicion. In that way, rumors became their own kind of history. Not always accurate, but always reflective of something. They showed us who had power, who was vulnerable, and what the public was allowed to believe. In the absence of justice or accountability, rumor filled the vacuum. It wasn't perfect, but in some cases, it's all we had. And that legacy continues today. When we hear a new scandal break, we view it through a lens forged by decades of myth-making. We wonder who's spinning what, who's protecting whom, and who might get left behind. But we also wonder, what else is still being hidden? What dark chapter has yet to be unearthed? Because for every mystery that Hollywood lets slip into the shadows, there's always someone out there digging, connecting the dots, piecing together the past. Maybe they're journalists, maybe they're filmmakers, maybe they're just fans who refuse to let the golden surface distract from the tarnish beneath. That's why it's important not to dismiss these stories as just rumors. Whether confirmed or not, they reflect a truth about the environment they came from. A system built on image, where control was currency and silence could be bought for a price. They remind us that fame, fortune, and influence often come with invisible costs, and that the most iconic faces on the screen may have been hiding pain we'll never fully understand. So as you think back on the legends of classic Hollywood, try not to just see the glitz and the glamour. See the strength it took for those who endured. See the heartbreak behind the headlines, and see the lessons that history still whispers, sometimes through rumor, sometimes through fact, and sometimes, like a good noir film, through shadows no spotlight can fully erase. And that's all from the period of Hollywood that was known as the Golden Age and beyond, and how we need to understand the importance of these rumors so that things don't necessarily get to a position where these kinds of acts of malice can happen again. Which of these celebrity rumors were you shocked to hear about? Which ones do you hope doesn't happen in Hollywood today? Or do you know of another old-school Hollywood rumor scandal that should have been on our list? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the channel.